So my background, to slightly qualify myself, is simply that I'm an architect. So I had 20 years ago, had an interest starting in healthy buildings. And because healthy buildings is not just about, it's not just about sun and light and sort of the normal amenity values, it's also about the invisible environment, which is electromagnetics. It is low frequency radiation from sockets. That was traditionally what was identified as harmful. We've sort of forgotten about that now. It's been overtaken by nobody realizing that this is also another dimension which is affecting our environment in houses. And architecturally, there's also chemicals and all that outgassing you get in buildings as well. So there's a whole host of stuff that we don't see and we don't realize that it is in buildings, and it's important to consider. So that's how I got into it. And I would also say that, like everyone here, we're not the men in white coats. We're not the lettered experts in that particular field. And I don't think that matters at all, because what we need to be able to do is have the inquisitiveness and the confidence to go and read the papers of the experts. Well, they're the qualified ones. They come out with the information we can read. We're taught to read. We can read those, and so we can educate ourselves. And that's a massive thing, I think, about disempowerment these days. We're told, you get these interviews on BBC. What are those dreadful BBC morning presenters? Good Morning Britain say, "Are you an epidemiologist?" Well, no, but the guy I've read the paper about was, he wrote it, not me. So it's this kind of gaslighting of you're not qualified to read or understand or have an opinion, but really not true. And, so I feel I'm just a messenger, and just helping convey what is out there in terms of the professional literature on this stuff. So what is an EMF? You can see the little animation. So basically, a charge has an electric field, and when that charge, a photon or an electron, a proton, when that charge is moving through space, that field radiates, it propagates. And so together, there's a magnetic component. Magnetic field goes one way, and the electric field is always at 90 degrees to that. So they're polarized from each other. And they move together as the charge moves through space, and it all moves. If it's electromagnetic radiation, it's moving at the speed of light in this matter state. Or there are other speeds of light if you want to go up the frequencies into the non-physical that we don't see so much. So that's basically what it's doing. It's a moving charge, which is radiating a field. And you may have heard of the electromagnetic spectrum. So this just puts it all into context. What we are used to talking about is that lower end of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is where all our technology exists and operates. So right down at the very low frequency. So frequency is a measure of cycles per second, so how many times the wave goes up and down per second. So where it's going fairly slowly, so 60 times a second, that's electricity in the houses, 60 hertz. And then you go up a bit, you've got the pylons, then you've got the radios, the televisions. A little bit further up, you've got mobile phones, and you've got microwave ovens, which are pretty much the same frequency, around 2.4 gigahertz. 1 gigahertz is 1 billion cycles a second. So just at the level of the phone and the microwave, that's bloody fast. It's amazing, isn't it? I think it's amazing that engineers can actually invent things which will wriggle that fast, even more than a kitten or an eel. And then, so 2.4 it's a good little marker point there, because the microwave oven is 2.4 gigahertz, a mobile phone network spectrum around 4G is about 2.4 gigahertz. So there's one question. People say, well, your microwave oven cooks your food. Is my phone cooking my head? The answer is, well, yes, the phone does a bit. But the big difference is the microwave oven is working at 3 kilowatts of power output. So 3,000 watts is being emitted by the oven to cook the food, whereas your phone is emitting sort of microwatts. It's a much lower power factor. But you've got the element of time. So if you've got a phone against your head for half an hour, there is microheating, there is that thermal effect. And that is acknowledged by the industry and by the regulators, which we'll touch on a bit later. And then we go further up. This is all in the non-ionizing spectrum. So this is one of the arguments deployed by BBC. Let's just put them up as the poster child of this stuff's all safe. They'll say, but it's all non-ionizing, so it's all fine. What they're talking about is stuff below the visible light, where scientifically it doesn't have the power, the photons don't have the energy to strip electrons from atoms, which is what is recognized as, the circle doesn't go to ionizing. The ionizing radiation is what does that. So it's acknowledged that X-rays, cosmic rays, gamma rays, they can, nuclear radiation, nuclear decay, that can strip electrons out of atoms. That's called ionizing radiation. And it's something to do, it's just the quality of that frequency. It has enough power to do that. If you get below visible light, that doesn't happen, but other things happen, which we will touch on. So visible light is this sort of the Rubicon. Below that is where we're using the electromagnetic spectrum to power our communications. So, very briefly, there's only one of these slides left, luckily because you can't really see it. But what makes a signal useful? How does it transfer information? You've got the oscillating sine wave, we might be familiar with that. That, in an analog way, is shaped into different peaks and troughs and packets, and that's what the shaping is called, the modulation of a signal. That is what puts information into the signal, because it gives it a certain form, and then that form means something in terms of digits and numbers. That's then received at the other end by the phone or whatever it is, and that's decoded and then converted into sound and voice or image or whatever. So what we need to remember simply is that it's the modulation of the signals, which is what distinguishes natural non-ionizing radiation from the man-made stuff. That's one of the features. It's modulated, it's shaped. So it's a bit like you're writing postcards. You want to send 100 postcards to your granny all at once into one envelope. So all of those 100 postcards are modulated and compacted into one envelope, which is the wave package. That's the signal, and it sends it off. But what's happening now, so in the olden days, the golden days of 20 years ago, this was all fairly simple modulation with analog waves, so just the curvy ones. It then became digital. When that happened, the waves were made more binary and they were pulsed. So they became square tooth, they became more jagged and had a different quality to them. But what it meant was they could also use lots of different methods to modulate. So varying the factors of time and space and speed, and also overlaying different messages all into one signal. They could bundle it all up and make it really complicated. That's all we need to remember, really. So the more complex the ways of modulating the signals became, the more complex these became to our body when our body is experiencing the impact of these signals. Okay, and that's what was causing adaptive stress. So adaptive stress is what's happening to the body. But the elephant in the room, yeah, there he is also to remember what all the other stuff, because we'll talk about 5G, but let's just remember the elephant in the room, and this ties into the last bit, what can we do about it, is to look at our own houses, look in our own pockets. We're surrounded by dozens of devices now which are emitting radiation. Deloitte's published a paper last year saying that on average we've now got about 25 devices surrounding us in our homes or schools which are emitting. And it's this boiling frog we don't really realize. The boiling frog becomes the big elephant. And we started with the DECT phones in the 80s, with the cordless desktop things, which actually radiate a lot all the time. Then we've got cordless mice, we've got baby monitors, we've got smartphones, Fitbits, printers. Remember all the appliances, the fridges, the washing machines, the dishwashers, all these things increasingly have Bluetooth embedded in them. And it's very hard to sort of turn them off often. And smart meters, and I'm sure you're all much better than most people. We're going to do a vote at the end. And then in the middle is a mast image, but that can be symbolizing, for example, in our house, the Wi-Fi, which is ubiquitous. Most people have the Wi-Fi in the house, whether they realize it or not. It's usually on. But by the end of this, we'll all learn that we can turn it off sometimes. We do have a choice. So what does it sound like? I haven't got the meter with me, but there are meters that are called Safe and Sound or Acousticom, and these are really useful to get because they render this otherwise inaudible radiation audible. So when you can actually hear it, like a Geiger counter, it's like, oh my God, really? And then you can understand this is the quality that your cells are experiencing. Yeah. So you get an impression from that. That's Fulham Road at 6 in the morning when there's nobody around, really. That's just the background in Fulham Road. So that's an acousticom. It's going red, and on these meters, it's calibrated up to 6 volts per meter. So just in context there, the regulatory power levels that are considered safe are 60 volts per meter. These devices are calibrated at 6 volts per meter because Alistair Phillips, who's a British engineer who invented them, knows about the biological effects which happen at an intensity way lower, like way less than 1/10 of the guideline levels, safe levels. So that's why this goes red at 6. So this is normal background radiation in London increasingly. I don't know about other big cities, but as they become smarter, they become a little bit more chronically unhealthy. So if you can imagine that noise is what your cells are hearing, it's just really annoying. And so if you're a cell, that's really annoying. And so that's what adaptive stress basically is. I'm really annoyed and I have to rebalance myself all the time in front of this onslaught of digital noise. And whilst in the moment we're very adaptive beings, over time you add that up, you can see how it's just really enervating. It's like, oh, for God's sake, I just want to rest now, which is why nighttime is really important. As a little tip for section 5, get a white zone at night, turn stuff off so that we can't hear it, but our body can. Our body can just go, oh, okay, peace. Because adaptive stress, we can do it for years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. But every time it comes at a price. And that's a little loss of vitality every time. It's using resources that would otherwise be used in normal repair activity in the body at night and in the day. So 5G masts, I think we're about to go on to those. They're the tall new ones, which look quite cool in some ways, but they've got these modules at the top, which are potentially the higher frequency stuff, and then in the middle is more the 4G, and then behind that, the old lollipops, if you can see them. The older masts tend to be 2G and 3G. We're evolving into 4G and 5G masts, which is really about a slight increase in the spectrum, so in the frequency of the radiation. And we will define those now. So, yep, good. 15 minutes down. We'll keep going. So what is 5G? Basically, the difference between 5G and 4G is that 5G will be, sometimes is, beam forming. So beam forming is where they're called phased array antennas as well. So instead of, have I got that? Yeah. So you can see there, the 4G antenna is what's called a radial antenna. It's a radial array. So it's like dropping a pebble in a pond. The ripples will go outwards everywhere, and wherever you are in that field, you'll pick up your signal. Whereas 5G, phased array, means that you get your message, nobody else, which is kind of nice. They say it's more efficient because they don't have to blast it everywhere. They can just blast a little bit to you, which saves energy. But it's Jevons paradox. The more you make a system efficient, the more you actually fill up the potential to have more devices being sent more stuff for equivalent amount of energy as before. So like the M25, you build a road with 4 lanes, you're going to fill it up because you can. And that's what happens. So they made it maybe more efficient in terms of just you getting your message each time. But it means, and they say, we can now service 1 million mobiles per square kilometre instead of 1,000. So it's not really true that this is green. And the other concern about phased array, the directional nature of the 5G is targeting potentially, although they can do that anyway. So for me, that's not necessarily the concern. But it is also that you're getting, by definition, a slightly more intense beam of energy than with 4G, where you're just in the soup of it. And we don't need much energy, much power to receive a signal anyway. So it's making millions of darts of energy instead of one, arguably slightly more comfortable soup of energy. So that is one concern. And the other factor which really is different between 5G and 4G will be the spectrum. It is not yet in Britain. Britain is still using the same spectrum for what they call 5G, which is kind of fake 5G, for what they're deploying at the moment, which is still under 3.6 gigahertz. So if you remember, your microwave oven is 2.4. So it's just slightly higher, it's at 3.6. And they're auctioning the spectrum now up to, I think it's 24 gigahertz. So they're starting to try to sell the next tranche. But the millimeter wave begins at about 26 gig. So there, 26 to 90 gigahertz is called millimeter wave radiation. And that's simply because at that frequency, the wavelength becomes shorter to the point at which it's a millimeter between every wave. Whereas what we've got now is about 12 centimeters, about that much. So it's getting smaller and smaller. And there is then concern, what do millimeter waves do to us as opposed to the centimeter waves? Really, the biggest effect, as I've mentioned, is the modulation of the signals. It's not so much the frequencies, although different frequency spectrums do have a different effect on the body because our organs have different scales. So there is that factor of just mechanical oscillation. You've got a 10 centimeter wavelength, that's going to resonate more with a 10 centimeter wide organ. That's just basic physics. So that's organ scale resonance, whereas millimeter wave can get down to cell clusters or other structures which are millimeter scale, or blood, skin. The skin is a natural barrier, but they know that there are actually the sweat ducts are like helical pathways, and they transmit the millimeter wave down through the epidermis into the layers of the skin below, and then the nervous system. So it's complete rubbish that millimeter wave is benign because it gets blocked by your skin. Yes, the skin blocks it, but stuff is happening to transmit that. And there are very few actual studies done on it in public. The military know. But we'll talk about those a bit later. So those are the qualities of 5G. So it's phased array and it's a higher spectrum. When it's in fully operational, that's what it will be. And what's it for? It's to give ultra high capacity mobile signals and machine to machine communication. So that's the Internet of Things, ultimately the Internet of Bodies. It's not a conspiracy theory. I don't know if it's a conspiracy, but it is the plan that it's a really good thing, that we should have everything super connected. And this idea goes back to actually 1930s with Technocracy, when Technocracy as an idea was founded. In the 80s, IBM made their smart logo, this global electronic ecosystem, with the zero of the planet at the end being the black and blue bruised planet is what they're aiming for, with no sense of irony whatsoever. And the middle zero is what it should look like. But this is what they're wanting, the sentient world simulation, so a digital twin of everything that's happening. And that's partly boys with toys thinking that's fun and that's big data and that's how life is made happier and easier. But it's also, it's this overarching need to control everything, and including us, which can be nefarious and it can just be misadventure. You can choose. But that's where they're wanting to head. And to do that, there's need tons and tons of these devices, increasing amount of small cells and macro cells, all receiving and transmitting and centralizing data. So the Internet of Things is like that massive cloud. Everything is connected into the cloud. Internet of Bodies is when you are the cloud. You are the platform in the Internet of Bodies. At the moment, we can imagine this as the platform. It's outside us. We can leave it at home. We can turn it off. We can be independent if we choose. But when that platform becomes part of you, you can't really run away. So that's something to be very mindful of if making choices like that. Whether it's administered through injections or it's administered voluntarily through chips, who knows? But once it's in you, there's really no escape from that surveillance system. So the concerns overall are going to be they're environmental, they are health-based, and they are surveillance-based. I quite like this quote about the microwave dictatorship by Sarah Benson. It's a dictatorship which she says puts all others into the shade. The whole planet is at risk, including the bees, and once bees are extinct, then we've got 4 years left. But dictatorship for me is on 2 levels. It's partly for the electrosensitive, for humans who don't choose this. There is increasingly nowhere to hide. And that's really important. We need white zones. We need places where we're not affected if we don't want to be. But it's being dictated. We're not being asked to consent to this. It's just being rolled out. Like it or not, in your schools, in your houses, your cities. So that's one diktat. The other diktat is obviously the literal one, where the surveillance superstate becomes inevitable if it gets into the wrong hands. So there are two directions there. We haven't really got time to go into environment, but it's pretty obvious that pumping more and more microwave radiation into the air is not a good thing. In terms of global warming, so-called, I want to get some maths on this actually, work out how much electricity is used to create the power, how much power is pumped into the atmosphere through microwaves, and what picks up microwave radiation most efficiently? Water vapor. So water vapor is 95% of the greenhouse gas anyway. That's the massive factor in how the planet keeps itself regulated in terms of temperature. So if you're heating water vapor like a microwave oven with microwaves, that's surely adding energy to a system that they're claiming shouldn't have any more man-made energy added to it whatsoever. But nobody is looking into that. Nobody. It's insane. So somebody please do the maths. It'd be really interesting to see how 0.0000064% of CO2, which only radiates 5% of itself back to Earth, is more impactful than the entire contribution of man-made microwave radiation. So answers by, 12 o'clock. Okay. And also in the scheme of things, CO2 emissions at the moment, no, we don't like the word CO2 emissions, but let's use that metric. So the polluting footprint of this sector, the ICT sector, is at the moment equivalent to the airline industry. Does it say that on that? Yeah, so it says that as the airline industry. That little black sliver, I was amazed it's that small actually, the airline industry, because it burns a lot of fuel. But this sector, ICT itself, admits that within 7 years now, it's going to be about 20-25% of global emissions or polluting footprint is going to be from the communication sector. So why that's not relevant to sort of green box ticking, who knows? But it's being promoted, as you know, as the answer to man-made pollution. And of that footprint, half of it is data centers. We forget about this. We're used to just seeing the front line, which is our phone. But behind the scenes, you've got to run all the data centers. They've got to store all your photos from this weekend and from everybody's summer holidays. They've got to store the insane volume of things that are shared and retweeted every day by everybody. And it all goes somewhere. And that all needs cooling. It all needs holding in mainframes. It's a massive infrastructure. And then after that, the next quarter of the energy or the impact is the communication networks. So all the cell towers, all of that, all the hubs, all the cables, everything that's needed to wire it all together. And then the last 25% is our devices. It's our laptops, the displays, the VDUs, the smartphones, and they all get thrown away and then they get remade. So all of that, the whole life cycle cost of all of that is huge. And it's not properly factored into this mad race to promote this as the solution to changing climates. So, well, most people, I just like this slide. You probably all look like that this morning. Yay, it's a talk on AMF at 9 o'clock. So the wake up thing, well, we've had this 3 years ago, so it's a slightly old slide. And you're all here and you're all curious. But I think it's so important to be curious about what is happening. And as you've had talks about Agenda 2021, 2030, the Great Reset, the Programme for Digital Twin, that's official policy, the EU Programme for Digital Twin, which is that Internet of Bodies. And MOD papers in Britain, 2021, human augmentation is a really good thing. They're funding that and promoting that as solutions to life. So this fourth industrial revolution is the thing that we know all that. And we know that the health pass was probably an attempt to test out the blockchain, the digital health pass. Once they get us used to that, we can submit more voluntarily to an ID 2020 blockchain. And once everything that we do is on the ledger, then there's no escape from our own data, and big AI can read it all the time. And that's when we slip into digital technocracy without realizing it. The central bank digital currency, the facial recognition, and we all know this, so we'll go to what we don't know. And that's all been done in China. Facial recognition is very easy already, and it doesn't actually need us to be with our phones, the platform inside us. It's all there, and that's quite scary. So stuff we may be less familiar with. So the fallacies. And again, we'll sort of go fairly quickly. One fallacy. We're always told when we complain to our councils or ask our councils if this stuff is sensible, they say, oh, well, the ICNUP safety standards are adequate. You know, that it's safe. And same if you talk to a school. That's what they hide as well. The next thing is they say that that's because non-ionizing radiation does no harm. So remember, that's the light which does. And the other thing they tell us, science is not conclusive. The science, this might be harmful. They say it's not conclusive, therefore it's not relevant. You know, until you convince them. And so they all go back to sleep and stick their head in the sand, thinking they've citizens and officers. Standards adequate. It's complete horseshit language. They're 20 years old. They started in 1996 when the FCC, Federal Communications Commission in America, were asked to put some sort of regulatory framework together to reassure citizens that the increasing exposure to RFR wasn't going to be harmful, and they had it all. They got your back. It's all in hand. As long as it doesn't go above this level, you're all okay. The issue was that the military-industrial complex, so the MIC, and the FCC were stuck and have to be stuck with what they call the thermal effect, which is where they can only acknowledge the heating element of microwave radiation. So that's all they measured in 1996, was a head being heated by a mobile phone until it got 1 degree hotter. A bit like the planet. You know, our heads get 1 degree hotter all the time, depending on the temperature, so does the planet. But they recognised that 1 degree of induced thermal heating from microwaves was about right, and anything above that was not healthy. Which is probably true. You don't want to be heating it with microwaves artificially. But that's where they set the safe levels, which is what the equivalent now, I mentioned 60 volts per meter, that's where that figure comes from. That's the short version. And that's still what we're working with. And when they update the guidelines, they're now called the ICNIRP, the ICNIRP, are the International Council on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection from something that they say doesn't harm you. That they still stick at 60 volts per meter. They revise their guidelines just to look good every 10 years. They've just redone one, and they've actually increased the levels to allow for 5G. There's a lot of dirty play going on with fudging figures. The problem for us is the non-thermal, or the biological effects as they're called. So that's where the mechanism is that the incoming radiation can affect the intermolecular bonds in cells, molecular structures. It doesn't strip the electrons off, but it does affect the bonds by causing oxidative stress. That's a little graphic. ICNIRP, you can't see it, 60 volts per meter. But there are other organisations, including the EU Parliament. The EU Parliament says actually 0.2 volts per meter should be some sort of public safety limit, which is a lot less than the 56. So the EU Parliament, as we've seen with COVID and all that, are actually quite on it with a lot of things. They don't necessarily have much power to create change, but they definitely seem to have a fairly good open debate in their Parliament about key issues. And other institutions, building biology, 0.05 volts per meter, they say, is kind of a safer level. Don't go above that. So by reference, in our houses, our pockets, Wi-Fi, we tend to see 1 to 2 volts a meter in people's houses, or if you've got phones next to you. So 1 to 2 volts per meter, not 60.
Could you just explain what a volt per meter is?
Yeah, that's the measure of power density. So that's the amount of energy per meter, or what's the other one? Microwatts per square meter. There are various different ways of presenting it. So it's just the amount of power that's being radiated from your device, measured in these different units. So, yeah, does that help?
Yeah.
It's power.
Density.
Yeah, density. Power density. Yes, the amount of power. Okay. Oh yeah, so we spoke about that. It's the interatomic bonds which form molecules which are subject to the non-ionizing radiation. So it affects molecules rather than atoms, but that's still not good for you. This was a patent, US patent, a while ago, acknowledging this. And this was from the Iraq War. They found that when they'd given their soldiers the wireless body armor and all the kit, and their soldiers were starting to get sick. And they thought, oh crap, that's not good, because we don't want them to die that soon. And so they went to DARPA, and DARPA are the ones that sort out problems for the military. You know, objectively, they don't care about the politics. They're given a task, and that's fun for them. So they had to work out why. You know, what is the mechanism by which this wireless radiation is making the soldiers sick? And it was them that came up with the idea that it was the adaptive stress response. That this noise, this jagged Chinese drip torture of pulse-modulated radiation was causing the cell's stress. And so they had to then, once they'd found out the cause, they had to come up with a solution. And for them, it was a patent which Motorola took on for their phones, and then it got buried. But the patent was about, in this case, it was introducing a certain element of white noise just to disrupt the most enervating part of that signal. They managed to disrupt it enough without compromising the information to make the body relax a bit. So that's one way of doing it. There are other ways. But it shows it's officially known. It's been officially known for, well, 100 years, like most good things. So it's the pulse-modulated polarized signal. That's what the problem is. And if you want some fun words, it's xenobiotic, which is toxic to life. It's cytotoxic, which is to cells. And it's neurotoxic, which is to the nervous system. So the last bit of the fallacies, the evidence actually is conclusive. There are thousands of papers and top-notch studies showing that this is a problem, but they're ignored. But if we look at the history, we can't read that, but basically, let's remember history, which repeats itself, unfortunately. Tobacco took 33 years between recognizing it as an issue to actually regulation. It's quite quick, that. Asbestos took 100 years. Formaldehyde took 23 years. DDT took 20 to 30 years between recognizing it as a toxin and dealing with it. The fluoroscope, insane. I never knew about these until this. Fluoroscope was x-raying children's feet to measure their shoe size. Do you remember that? Yeah, I don't. Too young. So it took 52 years to recognize that and regulate that, which is madness. But RFR, radiofrequency radiation, 1889 it was first noticed to be not necessarily good for us, chronically anyway. And so that's over 130 years now, and how much longer? But the problem with RFR, as opposed to these other industrial hazards, is that you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, and we love it. You know, we can't. It's really useful. Whereas fluoroscopes you could choose, DDT, all these other industrial pollutants tend to be a bit localized. And so that feature alone meant you could escape. So there wasn't that microwave dictatorship. You could escape. This is everywhere. We can't see it, smell it, or hear it. And so it gets under the radar. And the other thing is that the dose response, the time lag between being dosed with it and affected by it and seeing a symptom or an effect is really long. It's like 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So you can imagine, A, that means we're not going to recognize what's happening to us because we don't notice change over a long time. The regulatory authorities don't recognize and don't need to recognize this because the cause and effect which is needed in court to prove your probability of harm is really slippery. It's really hard. Even with the jabs, you can see cause and effect can be 3 days to 3 weeks. And even then, the amount of obstruction to recognizing that as a thing is really high. So imagine after 30 years, well, it could have been anything. And it can be anything. That's the problem. This is contributory. There are lots of other toxins in our life, and this is just another one, which it can be the one that breaks the camel's back. In conjunction with multiple chemical sensitivity is another one, which often people suffer with in parallel to this. It's just when everything is just reached too much concentration in the body, it's like, oh, I can't cope now. So it's the chronic and the chronic stress, and also the non-linear dose response is another one which recognizes we are all different. So some people will be fine. I think my dad is bulletproof. He's had 7 jabs and he drinks every day, doesn't eat vegetables and likes chocolate. And he wears his mobile phone in his breast pocket. He doesn't give a shit and he's fine so far. And he's 80 something. So it's interesting that some of us are bulletproof, but a lot of us aren't. You know, some people are more sensitive, rightly or wrongly. So we need to know ourselves. That's another good invitation just to really see what matters for us, and therefore how to mitigate this stuff. No surprise that industry studies, 70% of industry-funded studies found that there's no effect, and the rest don't. So exactly the same for climate change, and it's the same for the injections. We're used to that, though. So one little slide. That's just to show weight of evidence, which is a term for legal proceedings, weight of evidence. Normally that means that the evidence presented by each side has to have fairly equal pedigree of peer review is the metric used, rightly or wrongly. It's not perfect, but it's quite good. So everything has to have an equal weight of evidence when submitted to court. But this is literal weight of evidence. I didn't bring it today because I didn't. But this is 10,000 pages of evidence presented by the Environmental Health Trust in 2021 when they were suing the FCC in America, Federal Communications Commission, for blatantly ignoring the non-thermal or biological effects of radiation. 10,000 pages. And the FCC lost. Now, you'd think that would be a good thing, that would catalyse a bit of change, but it didn't. This is 2 years ago, and they weren't given a deadline by which to come back with their homework. But they were sent away by the judge saying that you must provide a reasoned explanation for the determination that your guidelines adequately protect against harmful effects of exposure to radiofrequency radiation without taking account of all the non-thermal effects which are evidenced in this amount of literature. So they're like, oh, okay, but nothing's happened. So that's just one example. There's a load of evidence that this stuff is not safe, and it is roundly ignored. And you present it to institutions, universities or schools or councils who do have a duty of care to think independently and not just to rely on Public Health England. But they just go, oh, well, no, I'm not really interested. Public Health England must have read all this, and they say it's fine. This is how they just sort of bat away their responsibility, which isn't good. It's not good. Oh, we have a question.
Well, it's not so much a question, but the
ICNUP
report, the question to any authority that uses that is, have you actually read it?
Well, yeah.
Because in the ICNUP report, it actually gives the caveat that the person installing the system should do a full
risk assessment
of the effects in the area they're going to put it.
Yeah.
They would just say, no, ICNUP says it's safe.
Yeah.
As duty of care, you're supposed to check
Well,
figures and things with the environment.
Yes, you're saying that ICNUP in their own statements do say that the end user has a responsibility in the end to do their risk assessments. And this is what we tell councils and schools. If yes, ICNUP and B, other regulations say you have to do your due diligence and you have to make sure you are up to date with current science. But these bodies don't take any notice. Schools, you think schools would be interested for children, but they don't. Even my son was at boarding school who pride themselves on educating people at vast expense and being independent thinkers and stuff, and they just did not get it. It took 2.5 years to persuade them to turn the Wi-Fi off at night. And that only happened because they got an independent expert who was knighted for his services to British military radar technology, at which point my heart sank, oh no. But he wrote a 14-page report, and at the end he said that actually, considering the current state of evidence, which was even 3 years old, he didn't go up to past 2019, he said there is enough of a smoking gun now to warrant a precautionary approach for children. So he did recommend they did the minimum, which was to switch it off at night. So there was at least a white zone at night time. And but the schools still didn't understand that. They said, oh yeah, don't worry, we follow Public Health England. I said, well look, Public Health England just said in 2020 that due to uncertainties in the science, which means we fucked up, we now realise that mobile phones aren't very safe. So make sure you keep them away from your body and don't use them if you don't need to, and so on. So I said to the school, well, what happens when they say the same in 10 years' time about Wi-Fi? So schools should be able to take initiative, read this stuff for themselves and see there is a smoking gun and realise that a precautionary approach should be the sensible and moral thing to do. And this comes down to councils. Well, it seems to boil down to two things with councils. You'll either get a willing council who want to refuse masks on a precautionary and moral basis, or you'll get unwilling councils who don't care, don't want to do the research, don't want to put their head above the parapet, don't want to risk applications being taken to appeal by the telco companies at vast expense. They'll just go by the normal policy guidance. We've only had one willing council in the entire country so far, which was Mendip. They were they were beautifully groomed by the local campaigners to really understand that there is an issue here, and they did vote against a mast on health grounds. So that is on record. Did you? Yeah. On health? Yes. Or was that? Sure that was on noise. Was that noise? There was one that refused on noise. Well, most of them are visual. Most of them are sighting and appearance. That's the easy bit for the councils. Yeah, because that's. Yeah, have a look. That's the policy guidance is sighting and appearance. You can judge on that, but nothing else. Not allowed to talk about health. But Mendip did on health, and so a willing council does have masses of firepower if they want to. They've got all of these studies, they've got all of the acts and statutes and directives, even from the EU, which tell them that they should be looking at the current evidence and not just relying on ICNIRP, the international body of slightly conflicted interest officers. And there is the Public Health England advice, UKHSA, which also says, as the chap at the back said, Public Health England, just it's easier to say that the responsibility lies on the end user and the deployer of this technology to make sure they're up to date with their risk assessments and the current evidence. And you show this to schools and councils, and they're like, really? It's our responsibility? No. They said, no, it's not. Public Health England said it's fine. Public Health England say, no, we've said it's probably fine in our view, but you're the ones who have to take the hit. And then to rub it in even deeper, there's no insurance available for this kind of stuff. Lloyd's and Swiss Re, the reinsurers, have quite famously said, we're not insuring any harm from microwave radiation because they're risk analysts. That's their job. They don't care about the politics. They just care about the risk to them in the end. And they know, they've read the military studies back from the 40s, 50s, 60s. They've read the National Toxicology Program study. It came out of America in 2018. They know that it causes cancer. They know there's chronic long-term effects. They don't want to be the ones paying out because they learnt their lesson with asbestos and probably other industrial hazards as well. So look to the risk analysts. What are they saying? That's the smoking gun. So councils have no insurance. If people start to make claims, they're not covered for allowing the cumulative effect of all these masts to have an impact in the environment. Schools don't have any insurance. But it's the slippery eel, like whose fault was it? These kids, unfortunately, are going home. Usually, most people go home every day. They're not boarding, so they're going home. So most of their exposure is actually at home. And their parents don't know. Their parents don't understand. So a court would say, well, you've got Wi-Fi in the home, you've got phones in the kids' pockets, because you haven't told them about that. So why should we blame the school? You know, the exposure at school is actually a minor part of their whole lifetime exposure. So that's probably what schools, if they are thinking that it can't be pinned on them entirely. And even with councils, I think with masts, they can say, well, yeah, there's a mast outside your house, but you've got Wi-Fi in your sitting room, and your bedroom, and phones in your pockets, and everything. Yeah. Okay, well, you tell us that it wasn't that, but it was the mast. It's very difficult. So this is why people have to sort of wise up as well and take responsibility for our own protection. Our protection's a fearful word, for our own health, our own sort of sanitary approach to it. Ooh, we've got 15 minutes. So bottom line of that was there are loads of papers showing that this stuff's not good. Health concerns we've touched on, so we won't do too much more. Basically, we are electrical beings. Touches again on the climate stuff. It is an electrical universe. It's an electrical planet. We're electrical beings. The electromagnetic ecosystem has a massive effect on us. Yeah, we're also stubborn. That one. Those are people with their heads in the sand. So you've got natural radiation, which is depolarized, so it's spinning in all directions. It's not emitted at a strictly in a strict plane, which is what the man-made stuff is. Natural radiation is big white noise. It's masses of information, multi-dimensional, fully embodied, fully complex, fully beautiful, coming from the sun and the cosmos. We're used to that, and it's not modulated, unless it's a pulsar or something. But often when modulation, if it's simple, is sort of okay, because our body gets used to that. Oh, that's just that. But when it's complicated, that's what's annoying to the body. So when you get the experts saying, oh, but we've got electromagnetic radiation is everywhere and it doesn't, that's not a problem. Yeah, but it's very different. It's totally different quality, what we make compared to what nature emits. So it's oxidative stress really is the primary mechanism by which this harms us over time, which means that basically we're losing vitality, we're losing electrons. The stuff becomes positively charged. Elements in our system become positively charged, which means a plus sign means it's losing electrons. So when you're losing a minus, you go plus. So we're losing electrons, we're leaking life force as we become oxidatively stressed by any toxin, not just this one. But it's the common ground is the oxidative stress. So, and life force and electricity is what we need to stay healthy and to power the systems that keep us healthy. It can also, this Chinese drip torture can also cause blood-brain barrier leakage and other membrane damage. DNA damage indirectly, so it's not stripping electrons out of the DNA, but the molecular bonds which are affected and the damage within the cell can then have an impact on the DNA, which starts to unwind, and that's damage, obviously. Melatonin disruption. There are 19 studies showing that at night time, for example, the body receives the microwave radiation as though it's daylight, because we haven't been designed to distinguish between 2 gigahertz and visible light frequency, because it was all the same in nature. So it regards even 2 or 20 gigahertz as daylight. This is the theory for that mechanism. And so it doesn't go into deep sleep. The part of the brain goes, oh, it's still daylight. And so it doesn't drop down into that melatonin cycle. And the melatonin hormone is really important for that repair mechanism during the night. Which is why nighttime shift work is classified as a class 1 carcinogen as well. So you're not getting that nighttime deep restorative sleep. This stuff is classified as a class 2B carcinogen by the World Health Organization. And I've got 10 minutes left. Yeah. And so it's being put forward to be a class 1 definite carcinogen in 2024. Whether that happens is very doubtful, because that's going to be a big problem for the industry. Voltage-gated calcium channels that's just one of the quite cool mechanisms which has been established, where if you've got too much of this radiation affecting the cellular membrane, it can artificially maintain open gates where the ions come through into the cells. And the one that's affected most is the calcium gate. And when you get too much calcium in the cells, it creates a whole cascade of other effects. This is well established now. So it's the voltage-gated channels. And you find out how amazing the body is as well. But how amazingly sensitive it is. These are single pole charges around your cell membrane, millions of them. So you can imagine that a whole confusion of incoming electromagnetic information is going to just make them a bit stressed. We haven't got time for kind of whatever that is. The peroxynitrite. So practical tips, most importantly, in many ways. So plenty of time for this, 9 minutes. So keep educating yourself, which you're doing now. And we need to do a lot these days with so many topics. And I think it's interesting. I'd never understood why people aren't curious about what's happening around them. And then, there was one there saying share it with others as well. But to have a filter, like know when to stop. Just say it once, maybe at family dinner, and then test the water, and then backtrack quickly. And after that, just live by example, I suppose. It's the only thing we can do there. And then, but personally, ground yourselves, bare feet on the ground, hugging trees, and sunlight, energy work, body work, breathing, yoga, movement. So you become, if you can centralize your vitality and enhance your vitality, you become a harmonizer. So a harmonizer is something that harmonizes any incoming effects, whether emotional, mental, but physical and electromagnetic. So what it means is that we're neutralizing the adaptive stress response, potential of this incoming radiation. You become strong. A strong aura, a strong vital field is the best armor for this. Which remembers that as humans, we are sovereign in so many dimensions, and this, the physical dimension, this is only in the physical dimension, this effect. So we are multidimensional. We've got all those higher capacities to dissolve it, to harmonize it, to help bounce it off. Without being glib, obviously we can still suffer. And then, well, let's keep going here. So physical detox, really important. Just to imagine you've got plumbing, you've got cables. You don't want rusty cables, you don't want block plumbing. You want everything to work so all your vitality can be distributed evenly through the body effectively and efficiently. So that was Peter Hind. Catherine is talking in the competing tent next door. It's got a much smaller audience. She recommends Peter Hind, who is Body Electronics. So worth looking at that. A good idea for the injections, anything that's happening these days as well. Another good one is at home to get a detector, borrow one or buy one. They're not that expensive actually. There's a list on my website. And just go around your house, just testing, just see where the radiation is coming from, because you will be surprised. There will be devices you would never expect. Or you might have a BT router that you thought you turned off, and you can't turn off the BT routers. And that you'll find that is still emitting as well. We'll touch on routers. So if you can, get one of these. Or Sammy, so you get people like Sammy, he's a consultant who will come and with even bigger toys and give you an assessment. So that can be useful as well. Yes, yeah, don't panic. This is all on the website. This 9 minutes could be an hour in itself. But it's just to give you the idea of what can be done in case some things we didn't realise, including the one after this, I hadn't realised for a while. So switch off Wi-Fi at night. You can do that with the Smart Hub Manager. Or you can do it by physically switching it off. The Smart Hub Manager is better unless it's BT. BT are naughty. They don't switch it off even when you've done that, because they're using you as a piggyback for their public service, their public FON, whatever that means. Yeah. So BT doesn't switch off, or you can unplug it, then they can't use you. Yeah. Many questions, detailed questions about that maybe at the end. Use airplane mode in case we didn't know. So many people don't realize that's a thing, but you can just do that, and that turns off most things. But modern phones, it switches itself off on again all the time, so you just have to keep checking and get used to how your phone works, how to make sure that's just sticking off with the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, with everything just off. Keep it nice and quiet. And then this is something I hadn't realized till I started diving into this. You can hardwire your Ethernet. So your Cat6 cables, which is, it's not old-fashioned, it is important. Offices do it. Military hardwire everything. Not really because of health stuff, but because of security. So you can put Ethernet, that's a really bad slide. Okay, there are adapters which will go basically from your phone, from the charging port, into an Ethernet cable. So it's really good to know. Belkin are the best ones, they're about 80 quid, they don't break, the cheaper ones break. So again, it's all on my website. But just remember the concept, you can actually plug your phone, your iPad, your laptop into the Ethernet using adapters. And that's really good because you get a proper hardwired signal anyway, and it means you don't have to rely on the Wi-Fi all the time. And it means you can download stuff without using your mobile data allowance. You can have Powerline adapters. So if you can't get Ethernet cables around the house through windows and under carpets, you can have Powerline adapters, which are things, again, look them up later. You plug one into the socket near the modem, you plug the modem in, and then it will use your electrical circuit to transmit the broadband around the house. It has to be on the same circuit. And then you pick it up again with another plug where you want it and connect that to your computer. Okay, so questions afterwards, but that's a thing. Okay, Powerline adapters. And then modem bags. You get these sort of silver threaded bags, which are canvas, and you can pop them over the modem, and that will sort of buffer or reduce the signal strength, because you don't need most of the strength that it's blasting out. So it'll soften it. Those are really good. And again, the links are on my site, and the cards are in my pocket. So above all, accept and love what you cannot change. Having done all that stuff, what you can. If there's still stuff like your neighbours, or you live in a city, then or in the workplace that it's inevitable, then remember this, which is that bit. Okay, so not the fear. And again, without being glib, it's not to minimise the suffering that does happen, even with the best intentions that people have. Try really, really, really not to be nervous about it if you can't do anything about it. but still row the boat, as Mohammed said. We don't leave it to the gods. We do row the boat. We try. We communicate. We ask people to turn it off. Blah blah blah. And remember, in the big picture of things, there is always an Achilles heel. Can you see? Yeah, there you go. I love that one. So there will be something like the QR code at Sainsbury's. If people just got their little black pen and went, and it doesn't work. So there's going to be something probably which pulls it down, which could be a coronal mass injection. It could be a CME. Might be something that just burns out the whole grid. In which case we could have bigger things to worry about. So just to trust. And if it's not the end of the human race, it will be the start of an informed and empowered humanity. Okay. Right. So there's no time for questions, luckily. I'll see you.
Excuse me, are 6 and 7G envisaged?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. They're working on 10G right now. Yeah. 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 We can talk until we're thrown out. But do go if you need to. The cards here for the website. Their work at 6G is definitely coming, but it's just ways of making it faster and better for them.